So I have, over this past week, I went and mapped out the next 6 or 8 studies. So we're at least going to go that far. We'll reassess things when we get closer to then. So we have, there's plenty of prayers that we can continue to go through and sharpen our own skills and abilities in our prayer lives by looking to these examples that we have in Scripture. So without further ado, Eric, you want to lead us in a word of prayer?
Dear God, we are blessed to be here this evening, and we pray that you be with us and allow us to have a productive study here this evening, and we pray that what we learn we can apply to our lives in order to better serve you. In Jesus' name.
Amen. Thank you. Okay, so last week we went over who? Or before we get to that, I want to talk about our homework first. I felt like for the last couple of weeks it was kind of too late to even get to it, so I wanted to put in the beginning of it for that. Does anyone remember what our homework was? Nope, that was the week before. Katie. Right. Pray before you leave somewhere in your vehicles. And so who was able to remember and do that one?
We kind of do that.
Okay, you do that anyways? All right.
Unfortunately, I got a wife that's
wonderful.
That sort of mindset. So.
Wonderful. I did it. I have to confess, I did it about twice. And when I remembered, it's one of those things that it's hard. I remembered right before we left the house, and then getting all the kids in, and by the time I know it, we're already here and didn't do it. But the wonderful thing about these things are they're exercises for us to just have a more mindful prayer, a more prayerful mindset, I should say. So what is that helpful? Do you think that's helpful to pray? Was it helpful before you leave? You find those things helpful?
Well, I didn't know it was homework, but I do it.
Oh,
I
you
don't
do
do
that?
it every day, but
Okay.
I do it sometimes, and I feel it is helpful.
Okay. All right. So how do you all feel about praying before you leave, and what are your thoughts on that, Steve? Since that's something you do regularly.
Yeah, it's become such that it's a good reminder. You're getting ready for work, you're heading out the door. This is something that when you and I do together before I leave for work each day.
Great.
And just the act of going out the door. It's we're gonna pray first. It took a little while, to get it, but just like every other habit. Once you don't do it, then you start thinking, did I forget something?
Right.
I mean, it's just like the things that you do. If you forget your wallet at home or something like that, it's like I feel like I'm forgetting something.
Right.
And it really is a good habit and a good way to get the day started.
I like what you said there about walking out the door is a kind of a signal there. That's a real helpful way to develop a habit and keep a habit, having those cues, whatever it is. For instance, our cue for our evening routine is, all right, these kids need to go to bed, or I'm getting tired and I want to go to bed, so we need to get these kids to bed, or whatever it is. It's time for bed, and then so we do our evening routine. Same thing. You run out the door. Right before you leave, you remember to pray. Yeah.
I think it gives you a peace of mind when you do that, especially, it's not like you're just going to sit home, but you're going to go travel. I forgot as I was coming here, but I always remember once I get on the highway, because then I include, all family and friends and Christians that are traveling to study, the Bible. So Wednesday and Sunday is a time when I always remember, even though it might take me getting on the highway before I remember it.
All right, so back to last week's prayer. Last week's prayer. Who did we discuss last week? Hezekiah, right? And so, what did Hezekiah pray for in his prayers? What was the motivation for his prayers? And what did he pray for?
The Syrians, for one, they were about to attack him, so he
Right.
prayed that God deliver him.
Mhm.
And then he prayed when Isaiah told him that he was going to die.
Right. So both for deliverance, pretty much, for one for protection, the other for I guess protection from disease. He was sick, almost to death there. So what are some takeaways that we have from these two prayers in Hezekiah? What are some things that we can take away and apply to our lives, or something that jumps out at you that you remembered?
If I remember correctly, he didn't pray specifically like when he was told he was going to die. All he did was remind God of the things that he did. He didn't ask for for his life specifically, but he just said, I can go do what you asked me to do. Right? So it wasn't a selfish prayer that he was asking for something for himself, or what might have been in his thoughts, or implied maybe in the prayer, but he just reminded God that
Okay.
had God not spared him, I guess that would have been okay too.
Okay, so kind of like a not my will, but your will.
Yeah.
Okay. What's some other takeaways we get from Hezekiah's prayers there? Amen.
He seemed to think, oh, that's great. It's not going to happen until I'm dead. What about his concern for his family? Maybe he could have another prayer
Mhm.
for them. I just thought, well, that seemed a little selfish.
Okay. Yeah. I would admit, being very close to that same age, if I was told get my affairs in order, I'm going to die at the age I am now with my young family, I think I would be, not. I think I would react in a similar manner. Just being of a similar age there, and then but yeah, I think so. He was certainly.
You would have thought of your family, or you wouldn't have.
I would have. I think I would have. Please, I'm not ready to go. Personally, just thinking about it in Hezekiah's reaction.
Hezekiah did his prayer, but after he was well and the Babylonians came to see him, that's when he said, oh good, that won't affect me.
Mm-hmm.
So I see what Ava's saying. He could have, after that, he could have prayed some more. Oh God, please forgive me for me being selfish, for me showing the Babylonians everything in my house, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But he did humble himself after
Yes.
he was delivered from dying.
Yeah, if you read that at the very end of the account, he does make amends. It looks like. So, but Ava.
Perhaps he was a little short on long-range planning, because the things that he put in order, just as soon as he was no longer king,
Yeah.
things went back worse than they were before.
Yeah. It reminds me of what Solomon says in Ecclesiastes. That once we leave this place, our empire, our legacy is left to someone else. Mm-hmm. Katie, did you have something? Okay. All right. So let's move on to this evening's prayer. We are in the Garden of Gethsemane here. We have Jesus praying. This is found, and I'll be citing from all three of the sites, the accounts here. One in Matthew 26, 36 through 46, around about that, give or take a verse. Mark 14, 32 through 42, and Luke 22, 39 through 46. Matthew and Mark are very similar in accounts, and Luke is kind of a consolidated account there. So we'll go through these. But before we do, what's the setting here? What are the circumstances surrounding this prayer? What's happening here? All right, Steve?
Well, it's at night. He's with his disciples. I guess this as the song, the hymns that we sing, you know, you imagine just a quiet place outside the city.
Okay. All right, somewhere that he's visited many times before, as it says. They go there often. Yeah.
It was at a moment when Jesus knew that his time was coming.
Yes. All right.
He wanted to go.
What did they just finish? Celebrating
Lord's Supper.
Passover, right? Right. We had the Passover. We had the Lord's Supper being instituted. All these things that are happening at this time. So this is like literally hours before his ministry ends. Mima.
I thought it was significant that in front of the other disciples, he fingered the one and exposed the one who was going to betray him.
Sure. Yes. So.
And there was nothing said about what they said at that time in any of the scriptures I found.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Okay.
But Judas probably rushed off to tell the Jewish enemies that his cover had been exposed.
Possibly.
Because they acted right away, and they weren't going to do nothing until after the Passover.
So we're in the garden here, like we said. We have this is just hours before he's arrested by Judas and betrayed by Judas in the mob, arrested by the mob, and so what happens here? He's with a group of his disciples. It doesn't say how large of a group. It may have just been the apostles. But then he separates from them. He tells them to stay there. And who does he take with him? Mm-hmm. And it's Peter, James, and John. Yes, Peter, James, and John. So it says Peter and the two sons of Zebedee. And so he takes them, which is his, I guess if you would have his closest friends, these are the ones that he spent a lot of time with, that we see in the scriptures, that he's with them a lot. So he takes them, and he keeps going a little bit farther. Or before that, he's greatly distressed. He's grieved. He's clearly in this deep anxiety state here. And he tells the three of this anxiety, and I'm sure they could see it on his face. I mean, if you could imagine somebody in this despair, imagine Jesus knowing what's going to happen to him, and being in this despair here. So he asked them to stay with him while he prays, stay and watch while he prays. And I guess in this vulnerable, isolated state, that he just didn't want to be alone, and as we would all be feeling in times of that are very terrifying and scary for us. And so he went away from them, and he began to pray. And he prayed the same or similar prayer, it looks like, 3 times. And each time here, he returns to his friends doing what? They're sleeping, right? They're sleeping. Yes, ma'am.
But the second and third prayer had 2 differences from the first one.
All right. Okay. We're going to look at all of it here, and we're going to look at all 3 accounts too, because there's several differences. There's several variants there for these. So let's look at the prayer. It says that they are sleeping from exhaustion. I wanted to make mention of that. They're sleeping from exhaustion and from sorrow, it says. And so the prayer, Matthew 26, Mark 14, and Luke 22. And so the words that are actually recorded aren't that long. It's but a sentence or two in some of the accounts. Some are shorter than others. But the context indicates that he was away longer than just whatever minutes it would have taken him to walk a stone's throw and say a short prayer and walk back. I think it looks like he was gone a little bit longer than that, because what happened, he had to be at least gone for long enough for 3 grown men to all fall asleep. And so it had to have been, we don't know how long it was. We don't know that, but he had to have been gone for some time.
Well, at the end of the Matthew account, it says, watch with you 1 hour or so.
Right.
It's at least that.
Yeah. So, but that could also be a figure of speech. Also, that is just a period of time. So, but yeah, it could have been. I'm sure it would be easy to fall asleep in that length of time, especially with the circumstances here. And so the first prayer in Matthew, he says, "Father, if it's possible, please don't let this happen. Let it happen some other way." But, and what's the metaphor he uses here? Don't let this happen. What does he use in Matthew? This cup, right? This cup. He says this cup here, and he says, but if it has to be this way, what? Right. He's going to obey if it has to be this way. And so in Mark's account, he says something similar. If it's possible, let this not happen. But he uses a different metaphor. What's the metaphor he uses there? Anyone have Mark open? Right. The hour. And so, and so he says something different here, as Meemaw is pointing out. He says all things are possible for you, God. Don't let it happen this way. And I'm paraphrasing here, of course. But if it has to be not my will, but your will, I will obey you if it has to be this way. And then in Luke, it gives us a little more detail that we don't have in the other accounts. It says an angel came to him and strengthened him, and then that he prayed with even more fervor at that point. And he describes his anxiety bringing his sweat as of great drops of blood, which is not in the other accounts either. And so after he prays that first prayer, he does what? What does he do after he prays?
He goes back to the guys.
Right. He goes back to the 3 and he finds them sleeping, right? And he says, watch and pray so you don't enter into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And he says something similar in Mark's account. And in Luke's account, it says that Jesus found them sleeping from sorrow. And so the second prayer we have here, he says in Matthew's account, if there's no other way, I will obey you. There's no other way, I will obey you. And he spoke the same similar words in Mark. In Luke, we only have one prayer recorded in Luke. So we don't have a second one there. And so he comes back to the disciples a second time and finds them sleeping again. And so at this time, he appears to see them, in Matthew, depending on how you read it, it looks like he may not have even woke them up. That it says that that he just sees them there. It doesn't say that at least no words were spoken at this time, is what it looks like to me. And then, but in Mark, it says that they were speechless. They had nothing to say to him. And so those two accounts, and again, at some point in Luke, he tells them tells the 3 that they need to pray to protect themselves from temptation. So after that, he leaves them again, and he has a third prayer, and he says the same thing for a third time. And so Matthew does say that. He says the same words, and he prayed a third time. And then in Mark, no prayer is recorded, but it's implied in the context there. And again, in Luke, there's only that one prayer recorded. And so he comes back the third time to his disciples, and they're sleeping again. What does he tell them now? It's time. The hour has come. it's time. My betrayer is at hand. He's here. And then that's when all the records tell us that Judas comes with the mob and kisses him, and we know the rest of the story there. And so that sums up the gist of the prayer, the account there. So let's go to some discussion, some application stuff here. So what do we gather about Jesus, the man, his humanity, from this account?
This in Gethsemane probably showed the humanity of Christ more than anything else that we have in Scriptures.
Okay.
How he was exceedingly sorrowful. In other words, he was so grieved that he was just at the end of his mental endurance.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's human. But we will never experience what he experienced, or no man can, because no one else has ever had the thoughts of taking on all the sin of the world, past, present, and future, and knowing how God hated sin.
Sure. Steve, did you have one?
What was the last thing?
Pardon?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that last thing you said.
And knowing how God hated sin. He was taking it all on him, and yet this was the only time I think that Christ ever asked God to change his mind.
Okay. So that's certainly a human characteristic there that we see.
Yes.
What else can we gather about Jesus here, about his humanity from this account?
Well, he didn't want to die. He wanted the cup at all to pass if there was any other way. But he came to realize about the second prayer that he was going to have to drink that cup to the dregs, so to speak. And he then, I think his battle was won. He seemed to be more at peace after he realized he was going to have to drink it, and he gave himself totally over to God, regardless of the consequences.
Okay. All right. Katie? All right. Dad, did you have?
I was just thinking that it might not have been, the humanity of it, and maybe yes, he feared death, but I think it was maybe with the added knowing what he was going to take on. He was going to take on the sins of mankind, and we don't know what that would feel like, or what he was thinking about that.
You know, he might have been afraid because of the horror of what he was facing, and that he might even have a heart attack or stroke or something and not be able to carry out God's will. And maybe that's why the angel strengthened him.
Okay.
Because, you can get in such a mental state that you're just going to collapse.
Sure. Sure.
I think that, first of all, as far as the heart attack, God knew that he would be able to get to the cross, without him, collapsing and dying before, because that was the plan.
Sure.
So, he was going to make it. And also, as far as the humanity, I think it was human for him to want his friends to share, to help him along the way. That's why he brought his 3 closest friends to him, and he went away and he came back and he's like, can't y'all even just stay up for a little bit? I'm in great distress, knowing what was going to happen, even though he knew it was really nothing that they could do.
Sure. Good. Anything else about his humanity? These very good ones. Yes, ma'am. Emo.
He was so distraught and so sorrowful in the worst way.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, when he went before the chief of the leaders of the Jews, he was calm as a cucumber. I think he won his battle in Gethsemane. Now, he didn't give in. You know, he was calm. He fulfilled Isaiah's writings to the letter,
Sure.
without speaking, without crying for mercy and all of that.
Yeah.
I think he won the battle for himself there in Gethsemane.
Okay. All right, so we see here as we were talking about these three accounts here, why are there such variations in this? Is this a contradiction? No. And how can we have such a variation of these three different things?
I liken it to an accident. You got one person standing on the west side of the street, one person standing on the south side of the street. The police come and say, what happened? Then the person that's standing on the west side will tell you what happened as he saw it, and vice versa. The person on the east side will tell you what happened as he saw it. Now, does it mean that somebody's lying? It just means that they saw different things, or they remembered different things.
Okay. I like that. Yeah, I think it's a combination of things here. We have, the combination of these individuals. Well, we know that they weren't there. These three weren't there, and so they either, they got it secondhand from somewhere. And so if you have Peter, James, and John retelling the story, hypothetically speaking, but retelling the story to all of them, and they're recording the whole account, and they're remembering everything that they heard about everything, they could sum it up in different language and still hold the integrity of what it is. And so there is no contradiction here, as most of us would realize, but that is a very common question that people ask, especially when you have different accounts with different details and these sort of things. And then also we have to take into consideration these men are writing to different audiences, and they're using different language, and they're using different frames of reference, talking to these people. So all those things would answer that. But very good, Janice. Why do you think Jesus wanted to bring these three with him?
They had seen him when he was in his glory on the mountain. What do you call that?
The Transfiguration.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they were the closest to him.
Okay, so yeah, I think that's definitely a good answer. They're the closest. Anything else? Why he would have brought the three? Katie?
For Peter, it made me wonder if Christ didn't take him with him because of him just saying that he would never deny him. I mean, it just struck me as odd that he took Peter with him and he had just done that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I was thinking, I hadn't thought about this until now, that Peter, he gave the first gospel meeting, sermon on the day of Pentecost, and he was close to Jesus, and so it only seemed natural for him to go. John was the disciple whom Jesus loved, and James, was he the first person that, did they kill him? Did they kill James?
I want to say yes.
Yeah,
Yes,
I'm not saying that
Max,
this is the
but-
reason, I'm just saying that that's what I brought to my mind.
Okay. Anybody else have anything as far as why he would have brought these? I think one thing is, just thinking of his deep distress that he was in. It looks like he kind of was holding it in until he was away from the big part of the group, and he said it began to become distressed and grieved. And I think part of it was his humanity. He didn't want to be alone at this stage. I mean, could you imagine he's about to die? Who wants to be alone when they're especially knowing this is about to happen? And I think that's also one of the things. Meemaw.
Sometimes when we're grieved, we don't want to be alone.
Right.
But we don't want to be too pressed either.
Exactly.
And he went away from them
Right.
to cry.
Right. Sure. And I think he may have needed he may have not wanted to be surprised, so to speak, because they said watch and pray. Maybe they're watching out for for anybody coming, or making sure that none of the disciples disturbed him, or any of those things. Ava, you have something else?
Well, those disciples were with him physically, bodily present, but emotionally they were not with him. He was really alone.
Yes, he was very, very alone. There was nobody that was going to be able to take this for him, and he knew not only, and he couldn't even take comfort in, at least these guys have my back. Like, he already knew that they were going to forsake him. He already knew that they were going to deny him, and so that even brought even more distress, I'm sure, on him. Yes, ma'am.
I think it also shows who's in charge, because the Jews were not going to do anything until after the Passover. And yet Christ blew the cover on Judas, and they had to act in blood. So Christ was in charge, God was in charge of the timetable there.
Sure, yes, he
So
certainly
he
is in
was
charge. Mm-hmm. So what does it mean, it says about Jesus that his soul was sorrowful unto death. I know we talked a little bit about this, but what does that mean, sorrowful unto death?
That just put an emphasis on how sorrowful he actually was.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Added emphasis.
Okay. He was in anguish. Yeah. Yes. The utmost. Yes. Sure.
We even use the same sort of language today. When we say we're hungry, what do we say?
I'm starving to death. Yes.
It's like you're not literally dying.
Right.
But it just shows the extent.
Mm-hmm.
It puts a qualifier on
Sure.
that level of hunger, or that level of sorrow.
Right. And we know here from this account that he was literally, knowing that he was going to die soon. And so I think that can't help anything. That can't, I think that's adding to it there too. So, okay, anything else? Sorrowful unto death. That's good. So has anyone here felt this sort of despair or anxiety? I know we can't, it doesn't compare in the sense of, the magnitude of what Jesus was taking on, but felt something that we can kind of relate to. Has anyone had any experience?
His humanity.
Okay. Well, I can think of one for myself where it was the day that I was having to have surgery on my eye. I was 16 years old, and I was in I was all in the scrubs, everything on the bed, getting ready to go in, and I just panic and fear swept over me like I've never felt in my life. I didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't want to be there anymore. It wasn't even a major procedure. It was an outpatient. I was only going to be in there for a couple of hours, and it was a done thing. And this panic swept over me. And I'm not an anxious, panicky person, and I just felt this fear and terror. Like I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what to expect, and it was just not like me. And I just tried to. They had to physically hold me. It's okay. They had to. It's okay. We're gonna be all right. As they're taking me down and putting the anesthetic in, and so I think that's the closest that I could feel like I was prepared for something. I knew they told me all about it. I knew exactly what was gonna happen. But as soon as it was time, as soon as the rubber hit the road, so to speak, I didn't want to do it anymore. I was panicking. I had an anxiety attack, and it was the most terrible feeling. And I'm sure those of you who may suffer from panic attacks, if you have, think of your worst one ever, and that may be something, we could kind of at least, relate to. Anybody else have anything that they have something similar, Katie?
Mine is a comical one to me now.
Right.
Years ago, Tori and I went to Disney World. I am terrified of riding the majority of the rides, and he convinced me to ride Space Mountain.
Okay.
And we were in the line, and they have all these warning signs, and if you're pregnant, if you have a weak heart, if you have this, and I said, baby, I have every one of those. I can't get on this. And we got closer and closer and closer, and we're standing there, and we're waiting for the car to come up. And I am so scared. I'm about to hyperventilate. My legs no longer want to hold me up. And I said, please don't make me go on this ride. And I could barely walk to the exit that I had to get to. That's the most terrified I think I've ever been. Going to surgery never scared me.
Yeah. But we can relate those things, like to this, where Jesus, how he's feeling and how he must have felt. Yes, ma'am.
There's one instant of terror in my life. I don't think I've ever told anybody this before. Once I was water skiing, and I don't know if I fell or what, but I was at the back of the boat, and I was submerged, and I heard that propeller go right over my head. It could have cut my head off.
Ooh.
That's the most terrified I think I ever was.
Yeah.
But I really just kind of kept it all in until now.
Wow.
And asked what's the most terrified you were.
Sure.
But that was a close call.
Yeah, it'll certainly make you go pale. Okay. All right, so Jesus didn't want this to happen to him, as we see here, but he obeyed anyways. What lessons does that teach us? Oh, did you have something?
Yeah, well, I was just
Sorry.
thinking, not really for me personally, maybe the pain caused me to feel this way, but for milliseconds, but I feel like a lot of women probably go through that when it comes to childbirth. Like
Sure.
you mentally prepare yourself, you know that this is going to happen, and then it's go time, and it's like, I can't do this, but you have to. No, not now.
Okay. I think that's a pretty good description there.
Especially those who decide to go all natural, and then it's like time to push, and give me that girl. No, we can't do that now. It has to have mine.
Okay. All right.
Everybody number 6.
Well, no.
We're on to that.
Yeah.
But for me, I got more nervous. I got more anxious, I think, than she did. I would never told her. I couldn't let her know that. But I think it's also the anticipation of pain. He was about to go through. If he knew what he was about to go through, the graphic. If anyone's heard, like somebody, an expert describing, the Roman technique on doing all this torture and crucifixion. If he knew all that stuff, but he's never experienced it before, so he doesn't know how it's going to feel, and he doesn't know any of those things. That the sheer anticipation of that alone would drive me crazy, and so for him to know all that on top of everything else, the sheer weight of it all, I can imagine, and I'm thankful it was him. I'm thankful he had the strength that he could do it.
Oh, one other thing.
Yes, ma'am.
In verse 41, where Jesus told the disciples when he found them sleeping that the spirit indeed is willing, but the flesh is weak. He was warning them because they've got trials that were coming too. But he exhibited the spirit over the flesh, and they all exhibited, they ran the flesh over the spirit.
Sure. So he says that, it looks like, I think, if my memory serves me correct, that he says this to Peter in one of the accounts, that the spirit is willing, the flesh is weak. Why do you think he says this? If he's saying it directly to Peter, or if he's saying it in general, what do you think?
Well, I think that the crisis was looming also for the disciples. I think it was morning and enough riding that they would be sleeping too.
Okay, that they were willing to, they were trying to stay awake, but their physical bodies weren't allowing them. Katie?
Well, we've all been through things that like Sarah just said, you know you have to do it, but you know it's going to be painful or sorrowful
Right.
or
Hard, whatever it is, yeah.
But still, you're going to do it because you have to.
Right.
But because we are human and the flesh hurts, you don't want to.
Okay.
I think the reason he said it was because he knew that they would all run away. You know, and he knew that they were willing, that they were sincere of heart, but he knew what would happen.
Right. Maybe it was something to have to do with what he just said about Peter predicting his denial, that you really want to, but your flesh is weak. So it could be all of those. Yes, ma'am.
I think this teaches us also to pray, because after all, he was the Christ, all powerful as God, and yet what did he do?
Mm-hmm.
He prayed to the Father, and he addressed him as Father, like a loving Father, the way he told the disciples to address him in the Lord's Prayer.
Mm-hmm.
So he showed that prayer, even to him, was necessary and strengthening. And you know, his prayer wasn't answered, and he knew it. And that is really a test of faith, is it not? When we pray for something that we don't get, it doesn't. Do we just submit and totally to God and know that in the long run things are going to turn out for the best, because that's what He's told us? But I think Christ was tested in that regard. His prayer wasn't answered, and yet he gave himself totally and completely over to God.
I'm not sure if it was answered or not. We don't know. The angel came to him. We don't know what was said there. There's a lot of things that we don't know. But it wasn't answered in the way that he.
Yeah,
it wasn't answered in the affirmative. We know that. Sure. Yeah. Yeah, it wasn't answered in a yes. That's for sure. Yes, sir.
Yeah, remember that he said also, nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will.
Right.
So in that respect, it was answered according to what
Right.
God
Right.
wanted.
So it could be. Yep. That's how it's got to be.
Maybe that's what he
So
was.
right. So we see. I think we can talk about this prayer a lot longer and get a lot more out of it here. But this, we just see that. I want to, if we don't leave with anything else, we see that Jesus, in his time and his hour of most vulnerability that we've seen since his fasting, possibly, that this was who he came to, and he had, he relied on his disciples to be with him. He was looking out for them. He was, he had all this stuff on him, and what does he do? He goes to them in prayer. Right? He goes to God in prayer. And so let's take this from there and remember that Jesus is our, the one we should be emulating and imitating. So next week for our homework, we're going to pray for a specific need for someone else. So this will help us be thinking of others and their needs. Help us to not be thinking so much of our own needs and of ourselves, but really try. And so that would mean we have to find out what others' needs are and those things, and hopefully it'll help us further develop our prayerful life. Thank you very much for your attention. And next week we're going to be in Psalm 90. Psalm 90, the prayer of Moses.